द ब्लैक होल इस्लामाबाद में आप सबको खुशामदीद। आज बात से बात जो हमारा सेशन है वो पाकिस्तान में हवाबाजी की सनत के ऊपर होगा। मैं भी बचपन से सुनता आया हूँ, शायद आप लोगों ने भी सुना हो कि किसी ज़माने में हमारी कौमी एयरलाइन जो है वो दुनिया की सफ़े अव्वल की एयरलाइंस में शुमार की जाती थी, मगर बतदरीज हमने देखा कि उसमें एक डाउनफॉल आता गया और यूँ कहें कि ये जो रब्त रूबा ज़वाल है, ये सवाल है, यानी द राइज़ एंड फॉल ऑफ पाकिस्तान एविएशन इंडस्ट्री। इस मौजू पे गुफ्तगू करने के लिए आज हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं मामून रशीद साहब। मैं थोड़ा सा उनका तारुफ करवाता जाऊँ। ही इज़ एन एविएशन वेटरन जिनका 40 साल का तजर्बा है इस फील्ड में, यानी कमर्शियल एविएशन में। आपने अफ़गानिस्तान में एक प्राइवेट एयरलाइन जो है वो इस्टेब्लिश की, फ्रॉम इनिशियल डॉक्यूमेंटेशन टिल द कमेंसमेंट ऑफ commercial operation and managing the same as CEO till stabilization in a competitive and a very low yield environment. आप एक एविएशन कंसल्टेंसी रन कर रहे हैं, तो इतना वसी जिनका तजुर्बा हो तो हमें सीखने के लिए बहुत अच्छा मौका मिलता है कि हम जान सकें कि हम माजी में कहाँ थे, आज हम कहाँ खड़े हैं और मुस्तकबिल में पाकिस्तान की हवाबाजी की सनत दोबारा अपने पैरों पर कैसे खड़ी हो सकती है। तो ख़वातीन व हज़रात, प्लीज़ वेलकम मिस्टर मामून रशीद। थैंक यू।
Management of the black hole, ladies and gentlemen. In the first place, I am grateful to Nair and Hussein Amin, who has provided me this opportunity to talk to you on aviation. The subject, rise and fall of aviation in Pakistan, this is such a vast subject that it really requires a very good expert to dilate on all aspects of aviation in Pakistan. However, as a student of aviation, I will try to tell you about the aviation in general, from the global perspective, and in Pakistan in particular, which affects all of us in our country. The aviation industry in Pakistan is the most important industry, but yet ignored at the highest level. No government, successive governments, have ever supported it for the last at least 4 decades. You may have heard just one statement on the floor of the House. It threw the aviation industry in turmoils. According to an estimate, PIA has, just one airline has lost about 150 billion rupees as a result of just one statement. Anyway, coming back to the subject, when we'll talk about the history of aviation a little bit, and whenever we talk of the history of aviation, it comes to our mind two names, that is Wright brothers. They were the pioneer of aviation in the world. Wilbur Wright and Oliver Wright, two brothers, they were running a cycle shop and a printing press. Using that kind of expertise which they learned while working on cycles and printing presses, they started building in the first place, what they did was they were very, very staunch of observers, and they were fascinated by the birds flying. So they started initially what they started was kite flying. And after kite flying, they developed some rudimentary kite of gliders. And while using that expertise, they designed and built an aircraft, which was a biplane, a very primitive kind of a structure. When the aircraft was ready, they wanted to try it and fly it. Both the brothers, they had a toss, and Wilbert Oliver won the toss. But when he started for takeoff, there was some defect in the engine, and they had to abandon the takeoff. So the next term, they corrected the defect, and the next term was of Oliver, and he flew the aircraft for 12 seconds, covering 120 feet above the ground. That was the first manned flight by an aircraft which was heavier than air and which flew on its own power. So that is, history was made. Number one, an aircraft was invented, and then the same people flew the aircraft. However, what is not widely known is that first flight was achieved by a Berber Muslim who was an astrologer, musician, and an engineer. His name was Abbas bin Farnas. He was born in Cordoba, southern Spain, in 810 AD. He was also a vivid lover of nature, and he also used to watch the birds flying. And since time immemorial, every human has fascination for flying, and everybody wants to fly. So he also wanted to fly. So what he did was that he made a rudimentary kind of a structure, which was like a glider made of bamboos tied with the silken ropes, covered with eagle feathers, and he gave it a shape of like a bird's wing. He took off from a cliff of a mountain, and he achieved significant height, and he flew for quite some time. According to witnesses' account, it was quite a few minutes. Some people say that it was 10 minutes. However, while coming for landing, since he had emulated birds, but he had not perfected the landing or braking action, and he hit the ground and he broke his back. He was 65 years old at that time. Anyway, human fascination continued till such time that heavier than aircraft was designed and flown by Wright brothers at the beginning of the 20th century. During the over 100, this was 1904 when the first flight was made. So 2014 was the centenary of the aviation. In over 100 years of aviation, it developed to a fast growing and one of the largest industry in the world. A robust and glamorous, which is providing fastest and safest transportation to passengers and cargo all over the world. I said glamorous because this is the next glamorous industry to entertainment industry. You may have heard of Richard Branson. He was a billionaire, but nobody knew him. He became a celebrity when he launched Virgin Atlantic, and then Virgin Australia and Virgin America. Similarly, the same is true for Donald Trump. He was known to the people when he launched. He was seen on one of the TV programs. If you might have watched Apprentice, and That was a very famous program. He used to induct people, young people, and then he used to interview them, and finally, uh, out of 20 people, most of them would be fired. And it became very famous when he used to say, "You are fired." And then he launched also Trump Airline. So it is, what I'm saying is it is glamorous because people, when coming to the aviation world, they become celebrities, like in the entertainment world, when the actors and actresses are celebrities. Aviation is a multi-dimensional, complex industry, quite different than the other businesses. It advances almost every year. The costs come lower, the tickets become cheaper, and people start traveling more. This is probably the only industry where the fare that you pay is lesser every year than the previous year. Starting from 1950, an average fare in 1950 would be something like about $500 for a particular sector. It has come down to $150 average. I'm talking of the world average. This doesn't happen in any other industry. So what happens is that the industry has to be competitive, and it is more on the cost saving side so that the operating expenses are reduced and people are provided affordable tickets. There is, however, if there is one crisis, take 9/11, it will throw the whole industry into turmoil all over the world. 9/11 would happen in New York, but the aviation industry in the other side of the world, let's say Japan, would be affected. And that is what happened. It took about 1 year for the industry to come back to its own place. The recent example is the COVID-19 pandemic. In the first few months, it seemed like the aviation industry has come to a grinding halt. There was no flights, there were no travel. The only airlines which were flying were the cargo airlines, and they were flying just because they had to transport the PPE equipment for the COVID, like the vaccines and the other protective gears. So, aviation in Pakistan. Origin of aviation in Pakistan goes back to a time when even the country was not yet independent. It was in 1945 when the founder of the country, M.A. Jinnah, he envisaged the need of an airline for the prospective country. He requested his affluent friends for help. Mr. M.A. Asfahani from Bengal, now Bangladesh, he came forward and he registered an airline with the name of Orient Airways in February 1946. He acquired 3 DC-3 airplanes in May 1947, and when the independence was announced in 1947 August, the newly established airline Orient Airways started operations, relief operations. The services that they were providing was from Karachi to Dhaka, Karachi to Lahore and Peshawar, and Karachi to Peshawar, Quetta and Lahore. This was the first ever airline owned by a Muslim in the world at that time. It operated from 1947 to 1955. In 1956, the government wanted to establish an airline, and what they did was they merged Orient Airways, and Pakistan International Airline was born. Pakistan International Airline had a boost when Air Marshal Noor Khan took over as its chief executive in 1959. So the 60s, 70s, and early 80s were the era when PIA literally became a world leader. Excuse me. There was the only what you require in an airline is professionalism. This is a specialized kind of a business, and it requires a specialist to run the airline. You may have seen that successively after that, many air marshals and air vice marshals and generals and even very successful businessmen, they took over the charge of PIA and they miserably failed. The problem with such people that they were themselves unprofessional. They did not induct professional people to do the professional job. Since I have worked in PIA, and it is my personal experience that whenever we used to have a new boss like an air marshal or air chief marshals we used to have, and they would declare that in our initial briefing that, look, I don't know anything ABC of the airline business, and you guys have to run, right? And just 3 months, 2 months or 3 months down the line, the guy becomes an expert and then he tells you what to do. So Richard Branson, himself a very successful businessman, he never headed any airline of his out of the three. He looked for the best CEO in the world who was an aviation professional. So what happened was that since Noor Khan was dealing with the government and he said whatever he would tell the management, the professional people, whatever you need, he would comply with it. Any funding you need from the government or sanctions, or generally airlines need sovereign guarantees. If sovereign guarantees are given by the government, then nobody buys an airplane. Airplanes are always leased. So leasing an airplane is such that you get an aircraft on lease, and it is like a money-making machine if it is run properly. So you are making your own money, and a fraction of it you are giving it as a rental. And that is how you expand. And this is what Noor Khan did, that he expanded, and he was even faster than the other airlines who was inducting all the state-of-the-art equipment. The 707 aircraft used to be known as intercontinental aircraft because it could go from one continent to another without a stop. Before that, it was mostly propeller airplanes, and propeller airplanes used to have the Karachi to London flight with the Super Connie would take 3 days because it would stay nice stop at various places, Dubai and then Cairo and then Damascus and then Greece and then, so it would be so many stops. Those were the days when visa was not a problem. People could go with Pakistani passport anywhere without a visa. So, but when the 707 came, PIA was the first airline to acquire them and start flying them to many destinations. So that is when PIA had a boom. And those days, airlines used to have not only the core airline activities. For example, when PIA expanded and we used to have passengers from east to west, people coming from Japan and going to Europe, they used to have a stopover at Karachi. Karachi used to be the head office. There were no hotels. He was the one who brought Intercontinentals, which was an international chain, and we had 4 intercontinental hotel in major cities. When we needed chicken, so those days chicken were not available in bulk. Used to have to buy it from the villages. He brought in PIA shaver. The poultry farming started by PIA. Similarly, hotels in Pakistan were started by PIA. They needed it for themselves, but it was, then other people followed, and the investment started coming to the country, and it also expanded the horizon of the country. So by 1990s, which was the worst year of PIA, there was a drastic deterioration in the service standards, coupled with the highly unionized staff. They actually brought the airline to a grinding stop. The airline was not operating for about 3 days just because of the union strikes. That was the time. Since then, the deterioration of the airline started. It never recovered. And a time came that PIA, at one time PIA used to have 52 airplanes. The capacity we call in airline terms capacity, the number of seats is the capacity. So the total capacity flown by PIA at that time with 52 airplanes is much more than even today's capacity when you have 4 other airlines also flying. So that time the population of Pakistan was less than half of what it is today. Yet it was thriving, and it was going to almost every city of the world, carrying passengers. And some people have a little misconception that PIA had monopoly at that time, and that's why it was doing so well. I don't think it is correct, because PIA had to compete with giants like British Airways, Air France, Lufthansa, United Air of America, Pan Am, Qantas of Australia. They were the most famous airlines of the world, and they were all coming to Pakistan. So on the domestic network, you can say there was no other airline. But on the international, there were many airlines, and they were really quality airline with which PIA had to compete. PIA had the privilege of establishing about 27 airlines in the world. They either have established it from the scratch, or they helped them to come back on their fleet. There was a news item in a newspaper that the Saudi airline delegation has come to Pakistan to seek expertise from Pakistan how to improve their airline. It was very striking, but the date was 1964. So people thought it is today. So today, nothing happens like this of today. So since, as I said, the airline business is extremely complex and with professionals, I can give you an example. Recently, PIA had a managing director. If you look at his CV, believe me, I don't think you can find a more brilliant person than him who has got such a CV in the whole of Pakistan. Who was a medical doctor. He went for CSS. He topped CSS. He went to DMG. He worked for some 11 years in DMG. Then he came to the economic division or so. He took leave and he went to Harvard. He did his PhD from there. And people say that he did it with honors. He came back, he was then helping Pakistan Planning Commission. And he was a brilliant economist. So he was selected to head PIA. He was a disaster. So, you know, what I'm trying to tell you is that it is not the qualification that you have. You may have a very, very high qualification, but if you, as long as you don't know the aviation, you cannot be a successful aviator. So the PIA story, the 90s was the deterioration, and at one time they had only a dozen of aircraft serviceable. The rest were grounded. Government came to the rescue, and there is another misconception that PIA gets aid from the government. PIA doesn't get any aid. PIA gets a sovereign guarantee, and PIA goes to the bank and it takes a loan. And it pays off the interest. The yearly interest that PIA pays on its loans is 13 billion. So if you have a 13 billion profit, you are still breaking even, when PIA never had 13 billion profit. So the profitability has gone to dogs. There is absolutely no profitability. Rather, the loans from the banks that PIA is taking are accumulating, and it has reached a whopping 600 billion as of today. And it will increase with that pace, about 40 to 45 billion every year. The minimum debt that PIA accumulated was in the year 2020, when it was a pandemic. So there was no operation. So there is another misnomer which I would like to clarify. You must have heard, there are in the talk shows and even the government officials who are related to the PIA or who are heading PIA, who from the ministries and from the bureaucracy, they normally say that the aircraft to employee ratio of PIA is very high. And they compare it with airlines like Lufthansa and the rest of it. What happens is there are certain activities which most of the airlines outsource. They don't do it by themselves. For example, catering. You can get good catering from any hotel or from any catering services organization. PIA has its own catering. It has got two flight kitchens, one in Karachi, one in Islamabad. The daily capacity of the flight kitchens is that they can produce 40,000 meals a day. And at one time, I haven't flown PIA for quite some time, but at one time PIA's food was probably rated the best. PK 300 used to depart Karachi for Islamabad at 7 o'clock. Most of the people would take that flight because the breakfast was really, really very good. So this was, you know, these are the professional kind of attributes which would take your airline. Why Emirates is so famous, or now Qatar Airways. They are rated much better than any European or American airline because they serve the best quality food. The services are very good and very efficient. So the fleet of PIA, which at that time they used to add 2 to 3 airplanes every year, that phenomena is no more. Whatever fleet they have, the fleet aging is the most important factor, because the older the aircraft, the more maintenance it needs, and the fuel consumption is much higher. Singapore is an airline. They lease airplanes for 5 years directly from the leasing companies or manufacturers. Manufacturers generally they don't lease, they give it to the leasing companies. In the aviation industry, more than half of the aircraft are not owned by the airlines. They are owned by the leasing companies. They give it to airlines. So they lease airplanes for 5 years and then return it. And they have that cycle because all the checks, major checks like overalls, they become due at eighth year of the aircraft. So that is a major cost. So they avoid that cost. After 5 years, they return the aircraft. In PIA, we used to have F-27 airplanes as old as 39 years. We were flying them. 747 airplanes, dash 200s of the early 70s vintage. Again, 35, 36 years. Whenever PIA buys an aircraft, because they lease it with the option to purchase, so after 5 years or 10 years, the price becomes very, very low. You have paid off the price, so you own the aircraft, and then they run it for the rest of their life. So, very old equipment, deteriorated services, very unfriendly crew, either the ground crew or the flight crew. All these things, and especially when you have alternates available. So people went away, and the airline now is just running just because it's a government entity. Technically, PIA is bankrupt. If the government stops sovereign guarantees, airline cannot function. But since it is a government entity, they support it, and it's not like only for PIA. There are, for example, Lufthansa. Lufthansa is an independent entity, but the majority shares are owned by Hessen province. Frankfurt is their head office. It was not doing well, just like PIA. So what they did, that was the first experience which Lufthansa followed. They had, like us, a flight kitchen. They had their own engineering department. They had their own check-in, and they had their catering offices. So and cargo. What they did, they made all these entities as separate companies. Lufthansa Technik is an engineering entity which is owned by Lufthansa, but they have to make their own money. From a cost center, they made it a profit center. Complete overall of an aircraft used to take 40 days. Lufthansa would tell the Technik that if you give us 2 days, aircraft 2 days earlier, will give you 1% extra. And now it has gone to 19 days from 40 days. It was an incentive for them, and they would get the aircraft earlier. So 1 day in an aircraft life is a lot of money. They made the flight kitchens as Lufthansa Sky Chef. Lufthansa Sky Chef, and let me tell you, Lufthansa Technik is contacted by Boeing company and by Airbus Industries. Whenever General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, engine manufacturers, whenever they want to come up with a new engine or new aircraft, so they consult them because they are overhauling the engine, overhauling the aircraft. They know the negative points of it. They've gone to that stage. They help the manufacturer in improving their product. Lufthansa Sky Chef, you go to London and you will find Lufthansa Sky Chef. New York or Los Angeles, it's an international company making its own money and paying their own and making profits as well. Similarly, cargo, the aircraft holds, other than the passengers, sold to the cargo, Lufthansa cargo. They run it and they made money out of it. We are doing all these things. PIA is doing all these things together. So for PIA, all of them are cost center, and these services you have to take from somebody. You are having it from your own resources, and that is the reason that the number of, in catering only, there are about 1,000 employees working. In traffic is, Lufthansa is, Fraport is an international company. It used to be their traffic department. So similarly, PIA has got about, I think, how much? About 1,500 or 2,000 people. Most of the airlines, the flight service, the flight crew, they are not employees of the airline. They are provided by the contractor. So you have no liabilities. All liabilities, like depending the other problem is that whenever you employ a person, so you employ him or her at the age of 20, maybe 22, 24. So now you have a liability of 36 to 40 years because you cannot throw him away. He will be there till the retirement, he or she. PIA used to have air hostesses, and there used to be a contract, 35 years was the maximum age. They were not allowed to get married, right? They went to court, and the court said that this is against human rights. How come a girl has to get married? So that was allowed. When a batch reached 35 years, they and Block A went to the court. Hafiz Pirzada was their lawyer. They said no. If other employees can work for up to 60 years, why not them? So that is how you see. If you see a 60 years old, no offense, but 60 years old, you don't find in other airlines. But since this is a liability, I was I had a program in PTV, and the anchor person, the lady asked me, Sidra Iqbal was those days, she used to be in PTV. She said, I'm going to ask you a very tough question. And I said, okay, fine, no problem. The producer, he said, what is the question? Let me know. So she said, the question is that why do you have so much older air hostesses in the airline? I said, okay, I will answer and you will repent. So the producer said, tell me, what will you answer? I said, why? Let her ask and I will answer. He insisted, so I said, okay, I said I will tell them that Zaidi, I'm forgetting the name, there was some Zaidi, Shaista Zaidi, was an English newsreader. I said when I was in school, she used to read news, and she is still on your TV. So how can you ask me that you have air hostesses of her age? Again, that's a government organization, so they have to be there till they retire, and retirement age is 60. Okay, we digressed from the... Okay. Deregulation. Deregulation of the aviation sector in 1993, and then followed by open skies in 1998. That was also, both of them were setbacks for PIA, because deregulation brought in many airlines on the domestic screen, but more harmful was the open skies when excessive traffic rights were granted to other airlines, especially the Middle Eastern airlines, and they were at that time establishing, and they emphasized, since our population is so much, our travel is so much, the local airlines could not cope up with it. They took the opportunity. They had a very, very, they were quality, like Emirates, Etihad, or Qatar. Then on the LCC side, they had Air Arabia and Fly Dubai. And left and right rights were given to them without any reciprocity. In the aviation business, traffic rights are given on the basis of reciprocity. If, for example, there is only one city in a country, they give us that city, we will give them one city. So, and the number of frequencies depends on the indigenous traffic between the two cities. 10% or 15% is added. What happened in Pakistan, that Dubai is a emirate of UAE. Dubai has a separate bilateral with PIA, with government of Pakistan. Abu Dhabi has separate, even Ajman and Ras Al Khaimah and Sharjah. It is just like if Islamabad, Rawalpindi, Peshawar, Lahore starts bilaterals with some other country. It never happens anywhere in the world, but since our sitting people at the top, they don't even care. They probably oblige people, or for whatever reason, the regulatory authorities also, they subservient because they are a government department, they are not independent. So that also deteriorated the profitability of not only PIA but all the Pakistani airlines. We had okay, so coming to the deregulation. When, as I said, when the after 1993, when the deregulation policy was announced, airlines came like mushroom. I don't know whether you remember AirAsia and Boja and so many other airlines. What they did was, there was no proper system of the civil aviation, no proper policy structure for inducting an airline. People came and they brought in Tu-144s and Il-76 and AN-5, all Russian old airplanes, and they started flying. You might have heard that Boja staff took an airline tire to a petrol station for fixing a puncture. This was the news in the. This was the amount of regulation, and this was the quality. So what happened was that these airlines, the rule for a private airline is to fly at least for 1 year domestic services to qualify for the international routes. Most of them, the strategy was to complete 1 year as a domestic operator and then go to the international, more lucrative routes. They started to Gulf and UAE and Saudi Arabia. Since the quality, there was no quality, there was no punctuality, no efficiency, so people would not prefer those airlines. What they did was they brought the fares to a rock bottom. So all the competitors, including PIA, they could not compete. They could not establish themselves as a proper airline to compete with PIA or with the international airlines serving Pakistani market. So they were just playing on a price war. that further reduced the profitability of the nice airlines who were coming to Pakistan, since they would not compromise on their standards, lowering fares, because lowering fare means lowering standards. So what they did, one by one, all the airlines that I mentioned to you, they used to come to Pakistan, they discontinued their services to Pakistan. And PIA also suffered. Then what they did was they also gave rights to the foreign airlines to other cities, northern cities. Like Dubai is one city country, right? So Dubai can come to Karachi as many times as they want. Emirates, which is owned by Dubai, they gave every major city of Pakistan to Dubai, even up to the DG Khan and these small towns. So what happened was it also affected the domestic traffic. And because previously, in order to get to fly out of Karachi with the other airlines, all of them used to come to Karachi only, not to the north. So there was a lot of domestic traffic from Islamabad, Lahore, from Peshawar, from all these cities to Karachi. That also suffered because the airlines started directly coming to, let's say, Islamabad and Lahore, so that traffic also suffered. So the domestic airline, they also suffered. Most of the private airlines, they had to stop services. A few other came, like Airblue. Airblue came with new airplanes, and they were quite successful for quite some time until that unfortunate crash, which really broke their back. Like now the Serene and these low-cost carriers have come. But the population increase is not commensurate with the capacity provided by the airline, because the airline industry in Pakistan, as I told you, the most neglected industry. There are in the regulatory environment, National Aviation Policy was promulgated in 2015, and it gave a lot of incentives to the airlines. But those incentives were on paper. For example, there would be no tax when there are parts, but who would tell the custom that they don't have to tax? So there is a dichotomy within the government that there are rules. Aviation policy says something, but this aviation policy says that if you impose a tax on the fuel, the traffic will be affected. The foreign airlines will stop coming because the fuel would be much more expensive. In Karachi is much more expensive than Dubai. So if there is any transit flight which used to stop over at Pakistani airport, they have stopped here and they have just gone to the nearby, which is like Bahrain or Qatar, or where the fuel is not expensive. So the regulatory environment in Pakistan is also not conducive for the airline to prosper. The countries, I was in Germany, and the government wanted to impose overflying charge from, generally, when you reach a country, for example, every airline is paying overflight charges. But if somebody comes to Pakistan and enters Pakistan, then that overflight charges is not applicable. They come and land, and there are landing charges. So they wanted to do that, and they said, this was in 2003, it would result about 600 billion in revenue for and we had every airline, every country has got, we call it BAR, that is Board of Airline Representatives. All the country managers are members. We invited the Commerce Minister, and we gave him a presentation that I told him that we used to have 19 landings at Frankfurt. When you increase the landing charges, we shifted to Shannon or Manchester. So if this is what you do, airlines will stop coming. Every airline told him the same thing, and he went back and he said, this is in the parliament, I can't do anything. And they argued with the parliament and they didn't impose it. Here, the taxes, you will be surprised that the tax component on a lower segment of ticket is about 45%. Higher segment, because it is now dynamic fares. It is not one specific fare. If you buy, let's say a month ago, you will get a cheaper fare for the same sector as compared to a day earlier or so. So the cheaper fare, if it's say, let's say 10,000, the tax component is about 45%. So it makes it very difficult. For the passenger, it is the out-of-pocket money which matters. They don't care whether it is a tax or it is an airline ticket. So this is how in the rest of the world there is hardly any tax on the, because they offer tickets like 50 euro or 5 euro or 10 euro when they are, if in Pakistan, if you do that, I remember we had started Swat. We were selling initial flights for 1 rupee, but 2,000 rupees was tax from Islamabad to Seydi Sharif. I went to the government, I said, look, we are charging just 1 rupee. We want people to fly on this route. When they start flying, it will be easier for them. Those days, there was no motorway. You know, it used to take something like 10 hours to reach there. And you, in half an hour from Islamabad, you will be in Swat. So if the taxes are less, you can develop such routes. And you can charge a nominal amount from the, and that is how the aviation expands everywhere. And you might have gone to Bangkok or, you know, these places where the fare for Pattaya, for example, it would be something like $20. Here, nowadays, the fare from here to Karachi is something like, I think, 25,000 rupees, which is too much. Although now the dollar has played havoc with the rupee, but even before it was the same. Okay. So we talked about the open skies also in between. It was in 1998. And open skies, I told you that it brought in all these airlines which are like the quality airlines. What they did, we call the front cabin as the most paying cabin for the airline, which is business class. In business class, the fare you might have seen is more than twice of the economy class, because you provide exclusive services, and that is what generally supports the airline. So all the business class passengers shifted to either Etihad or Emirates or Qatar. Also the long haul passengers from here to North America or Europe, UK or Far East or Australia, they also shifted to these airlines because of their very high quality of service and affordable tickets as compared to the European airlines. And then extremely good service. The lower end economy passengers, the Air Arabia and Fly Dubai, which are considered to be low cost carriers, which normally we call LCCs, they are the airlines which are aggressively taking the loads of Pakistani airlines. People prefer them because they have all economy, they don't provide anything, and that is what LCC means. In Pakistan, all these airlines are low-cost carriers, so-called low-cost carrier, like Shaheen is now closed, but Serene or Air Blue or Air Sayal, they don't provide any food to people, or maybe very nominal type of a bun or something. But they charge as much as PIA. PIA is a full-fledged carrier. It provides proper food at lunchtime, at dinner time. So the LCC, when deregulation came in United States in 1978, the first result of that deregulation was that it provided another crop of airlines. And that crop came up with the specific motto that everyone should fly. So what they did was they did not provide any service other than ticket, but the price was so low that people flocked to those airlines, and they used to be called LCC, low-cost carriers. Those low-cost carriers, they were emulated in the developing countries, and they worked very well, like India. Now India, in Pakistan, we have a chart, this one. Now these are the total aircraft, 44, all airlines put together. These are there's another chart, can you please, this is like dearth of capacity. There's no capacity at, when our population was 100 million, we had more airplanes. It is now 220 million, we have 44. Now look at this. Our population is 220 million. 5 million people rely on one aircraft, right? The passenger travel in percentage, it should be 7, not 2%. Now it is 7%. Now look at the 2019 figure of the world population was 7.7 billion, and the travel was 4.59 billion, which is 60% of the total population of the world. Now you can see how much margin we have. Our travel is 7% of our population. You just make it 20%. You would require 100 airplanes. India had, at the time of, we had PIA and they had Air India. Then they broke it into two. Indian Airline was domestic and Air India was, until very long time, till this deregulation came. Now, in India, there are over 600 airplanes flying. About 1,000 airplanes are on order by different airlines. Most of them, when I checked, I think it was a few months ago. Most of them would have joined or would have come because during the pandemic there were so many airplanes available around the world. All the Western countries, since the travel was quite less, so they stored the airlines and they were mostly bought by such airlines. India was one of the buyers. Now, if this is the situation, and this kind of a presentation, when I was in PIA, I've given it to the government that, look, how much potential we have. If we have 200 airplanes, we will not be able to meet the demand. One secretary asked me that, the seat factor, generally airlines go by the seat factor. The seat factor is not even 80% of the current fleet. So how do you say that there is a demand? I told him that, look, the demand has shifted. When you don't provide, when there is a lot of demand and less supply, the normal economic rule is that the prices would be much high. So the prices are so high that even the middle class cannot afford to fly. So what happens, the anomaly here and the disadvantage, that you are depriving those people who would like to fly, but they can't because they cannot afford it. So they would go to the ground transport. Our railway is in shambles, everybody knows. I don't think people would go to a railway. So what happened is that during this process, the road transportation has developed. Daewoo was the leader, and now there are so many bus services which has got much more comfortable buses as compared to Daewoo. There is a Q Connect from here to Lahore, and they, I think, charge about 5,000 rupees, which is a lot of money. When we used to have 6 flights a day between Islamabad and Lahore. There is probably now 1. Islamabad and Peshawar, there is none. We used to fly to Dekhan, to Banu, to Kohar, to Rawalakot, to Jiwani and Panjgur and Sui. All these have been discontinued. Now, in some places, well, there are some good roads now, but in Balochistan, there are no roads. If you go to these places like Skardu and Chitral, only PIA flies there with a small airplane. And there are so many. If you have an on-the-hour flight, you cannot cope up with the load. So what people do is they would take a bus, which takes maybe, I think, we came by road from Gilgit. It took us about 12 hours. So the road transportation has developed, and they have taken over the aviation load, which otherwise should have gone to the. Between Islamabad and Quetta, there are these cars, Toyota cars, are 200 cars leave every day. 4 passengers, and they charge about 8,000 rupees per head. An aircraft travel can be provided, if not 8,000, 9,000 rupees. If somebody is paying 8,000, he will pay 10,000 to reach there in 40 minutes. This way it takes him something like half a day, 12 hours or 14 hours. Okay. We had a global, just to talk on the global aviation industry so that you can get a comparison. Can you bring that slide? This one. These are 2019 figures. Because in 2020, the airline industry was almost closed. In 2021, it came, but not to the extent that even 50% was not achieved. In 22, the COVID is still on, and the effects are there. As I told you, it is a very, very sensitive industry. It is affected by the security situation, by even volcanic ash, by pandemics, by the wars like now in Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is totally out of aviation. Russia has suffered a lot. They cannot operate to many countries. Many airlines have stopped going there. So these things have affected it does have an effect. But so that's why I've taken the 2019 data, when that was the best year. From that decade, from 2010 to 2020, it was supposed to be the best decade in aviation, because the purchasing power has increased, the fuel price was much lower, and it was stable. so airlines could, plan ahead. In that year, 25,000 commercial aircraft were flying around the world. Daily passenger travel was 8.6 million. 100 routes were flown, 100 flights, and 50,000 routes. Total travel, you can see 4.59 billion. This is the 60% of the world population. Because travel is such, it has, the it brings two cities together. Airline is providing services to almost every country of the world. And it increases the trade in the airline, in the developed world, and even in the emerging economies. Airline business is considered to be an indicator of the development of a country, of their economy. That if the economy is progressing, their airlines will be progressing. So, freight carried was 50 million tons. Commercial airlines, about 1,400 around the world. Revenue generated was 900 billion. It is 900 billion in 2019, the total revenue. The profitability of that revenue was 36 billion. Direct employees all over the world are 3 million. And the supporting jobs that it provides, 70 million. This is the industries connected with the airline, like the tourism and the agencies and the catering and economic activity of this whole setup is 3 trillion. This is 1% of the world GDP. So this much is the potential, which we do not realize. So I think that is the end of my talk. If there is any questions, so please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the very comprehensive talk on Pakistan's aviation industry. जैसा कि आपने पाकिस्तान की एविएशन इंडस्ट्री का बताया एंड द पोटेंशियल, मतलब आई वुड फोकस ऑन द पोटेंशियल. तो पाकिस्तान में आजकल अगर हम कोई पिछले 5 years या डिकेड की वो देख लें जिसमें लोग ज़्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट कर रहे हैं, तो देयर इज़ अ टर्म कॉइन्ड बाय डॉक्टर नदीम, प्लॉटिस्तान. वो पाकिस्तान को प्लॉटिस्तान कहते हैं. तो हम ज़्यादातर ये जो हाउसिंग सोसाइटीज़ हैं और इसमें अगर किसी के पास इन्वेस्टमेंट है, दे कम एंड दे इन्वेस्ट इन हाउसिंग सोसाइटीज़. और मेरे ख़्याल में ये हमारा अलमिया भी है कि इफ़ वी इन्वेस्ट इट इन इंडस्ट्रीज सच एज़ एविएशन इंडस्ट्री, तो उसमें वो एम्प्लॉयबिलिटी आएगी और बिज़नेस का ये इम्पेक्ट होता है कि पैसा हरकत में आता है. और उसमें मतलब जो हम हमेशा कहते हैं कि पाकिस्तान में दौलत की पैदावार नहीं है, हमारी जीडीपी कम है, हमारा जो बिज़नेस हो रहा है वो कम है, तो इट वुड अफेक्ट दैट. तो आप क्या समझते हैं कि मतलब हमारा जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर है, प्राइवेट सेक्टर में भी हमारा पीआईए और प्राइवेट सेक्टर्स के जहाज़ मिलाए कि दे आर 44. तो how much do you think there is still the need of more private airlines in Pakistan?
Taking a clue from your first comment, Plottistan, I provided consultancy to Army Welfare Trust. They wanted to establish an airline. General Rabbani was heading the Army Welfare Trust and he was very keen. So we worked together and I got them license and we started working on the air operator certificate. In Pakistan, again, there is a dichotomy. In the rest of the world, you just go for air operator certificate and you start an airline. Here you have to get a license first. For that license, you have to provide them a complete feasibility and 3 years financial projections, 100 million cash guarantee, 500 million paid up capital, which now they have reduced to 300 million. Everything was intact and we were about to, already started. So that period, it takes about 8 months from license to launch, because it requires the crew, cockpit crew, cabin crew training. That is something which you cannot reduce. It will take about 4 to 5 months. Similarly, from that time, this was we were supposed to launch the airline in August, 14th August 2018 was our launch date. We had done everything for it. Since then, I must have provided the pre-feasibility to at least 20 investors. And when it comes to the total amount of investment, they say the same thing. Why not go to Pakistan? So the potential, as I told you, in Pakistan, even if there are 100 airplanes, they are much. Look at this. 7% of the population is flying, right? 44 aircraft. You make it 14%, you will need 88 airplanes. If you make it 20%, you need 120 airplanes. So the potential is already there. If don't take the word standard, just take 1/5 of it. Not 60%, let's take 20%. If it is 20%, you need 200 airplanes. This much is the potential. And that will provide competition also. It's now monopoly. I don't think the middle class can afford to fly from here to Pakistan the concept of low cost carrier is to provide affordability to the public who cannot afford a regular, which we call full frill carrier, which are much expensive. Like, Fly Dubai is much cheaper than Emirates. They belong to the same group. But that is another segment of population which they cater for.
We have few online questions. In the very beginning, you mentioned about the loss of 160 billion rupees. In the very beginning of your talk, you mentioned about the loss of 160 billion rupees. Not sure if the minister's statement was exaggerated or misinformed. The question is, how long will it keep on haunting us? And would ever we will be able to recover our credibility in the international community?
Actually, Civil Aviation Authority, it is their job to have safety oversight on the airline. Now, the licenses are issued by the Civil Aviation Authority. Our Civil Aviation Authority is already in Category 2, right? So when the Civil Aviation Authority is in Category 2, and when this statement came, there were many countries who stopped PIA from operating. Not PIA, Pakistani Airlines. Pakistani Airlines cannot operate to UK, to Europe, and to USA. The flights were stopped. Because when somebody says that 80% of our licenses are, 80% or 70%, he mentioned, are fake. There was an investigation and they found out that there were a few. These things happened in India. Quite a few pilots were found that, they had done some kind of tampering in their license. Every pilot's hours are logged, right? So every flight that you perform, the number of hours are logged into your license. So the more hours you have flown, the more you are acceptable to a foreign country if you go there for a job. So what they did was, they did such kind of a thing. And no minister said that, there was a tampering in the licenses of our pilots. Investigation was launched and they were punished. So this could have been done. Finally, they found, I think, a few people who had done such kind of a thing. Recovery. Now, the IASA was supposed to come and inspect the civil aviation of Pakistan, probably in September. And they said, we are not satisfied with their progress. They will now come in March of 2023. So the more time they give you, you remain in that zone which is prohibited. So the Pakistani airline, I'm not talking of PIA, all Pakistani airlines cannot fly. UK is a market where maximum number of Pakistanis live. That was one of the most lucrative market for Pakistani airlines. USA is another market. In Europe also there are so many Pakistanis, and Pakistani airlines thrive. The rest of the airlines don't fly there. It was only AirBlue had started, they stopped. Shaheen is no more. The rest of the airlines are going to Gulf and UAE and Saudi Arabia. So they don't go to. So it is PIA which is going, and they are the losses that I said there was some estimate of 150 billion. It could be less or it could be even more, because every day passes, there's no flight. So the amount of money that PIA used to earn from those routes, it's not there. How long will it take? No one can predict. Unless the Civil Aviation Authority improves itself to the extent that the Safety Agency approves them, allows them to, gives them back that Category 1 status, only then the airline will start flying.
सर सेकंड ऑनलाइन क्वेश्चन है, कह रहे हैं कि जो मुल्क की बतौर मजमूई जो मुआशी हालत है वो तो बिल्कुल मेल्टडाउन का शिकार है और ख़बरें आती हैं कि डिफ़ॉल्ट हम डिक्लेयर हो जाएंगे. ऐसी सूरत हाल में जैसा कि आपने मेंशन किया था कि जो कौमी एयरलाइन है वो हुकूमतें उनको सपोर्ट करती हैं, तो जब हुकूमत या मुईशत आपकी इतनी डाउन होगी तो क्या हम तवक्को रखते हैं कि मुस्तकबिल में भी बेल आउट मिलता रहेगा? सो डू यू सी एनी लाइट एट द एंड ऑफ द टनल?
Hukumat support is limited to providing sovereign guarantee. PIA gets loans from the banks, commercial banks, and they have to pay interest on those loans. So with every passing day, the burden is increasing. 600 billion is insolvable. I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. PIA has no future. A time will come that they will not be able to pay even the interest. Since it is a government entity, the problem is that if it goes bankrupt, it is the responsibility of the government to bail it out. So that is why they are quiet. Otherwise, this 600 billion has to be paid by the government of Pakistan. And then the number of jobs, there are about 9 or 10,000 people working in the airline. So those 9 and 10,000 families will become jobless. They will have no money to eat. So probably that is also the consideration of the government.
इट इज़ वेरी सैड सिचुएशन. सर एक और क्वेश्चन है, वो कह रहे हैं कि आपका जो इंटरनेशनल एयरलाइन अफ़गानिस्तान में जो इस्टेब्लिश करने का तजर्बा है इन वेरी लो यील्ड इन्वायरमेंट, वहाँ का तजर्बा और यहाँ जो सूरत हाल है, तो इन दोनों को आप कैसे मुवाजना करते हैं? वो कैसे इस्टेब्लिश हुआ और यहाँ जो ज़वाल है, क्या वहाँ पे भी उसका मतलब दोनों का वो कंपैरिजन देखना चाह रहे हैं?
Pakistan environment is much better than Afghanistan. And that is why, you have Serene, you have got Air Blue, you have got Air Seal. Now there's another airline which is coming up, uh, Q Air is one, and Fly Jannah is another one. And all these airlines are making good money. They are making profits because they are charging much more than what they should charge. So the environment here is, as I told you, there is a lot of demand and there is no supply. So it is their own sweet will. What they do, all these airlines, they check PIA fares. As I told you that now it is dynamic fares, fares change every day. So they check PIA fares, and if PIA is selling, let's say, at 20,000, so they would start selling at 18,500 or 19,000. They are making good money, and if there are even more airlines, they would be making money still.
तो इस सारी सूरत हाल से निकलने के लिए आइडियली अगर आप बुलेट पॉइंट्स दे सकें या 4-5-6 स्टेप्स बताएं कि इन पर अमल किया जाए तो हम अगर माजी जैसा नहीं बना सकते मुस्तकबिल को तो कम से कम हाल से बेहतर हम निकल सकें जो अभी इतनी डाउनफॉल चल रहे हैं.
देखिए जी, as far as the private airlines are concerned, they are doing well. They have good management and they have crew and they have this liberty. If somebody doesn't want to work, they can be shunted out at any time. So that is when you have that fear in mind that if I don't work, in the government organizations, what happens? You work or you don't. Nobody can tell you anything. And there have been instances when people in MLR 52, in Zia's times, many people who belonged to People's Party at that time, they were shunted out of the airline, right? When the People's Party government came, all of them came back and they were given even promotions and they were given even the lost salaries. So, your job is protected. That is why there is, as I was talking, there was one thing which I missed in your question. You said there are so many people and it is a burden. It is actually not. Because with so many people, PIA is paying about 15% of his budget as a payroll. In the other airlines, it is 28 to 30%. So you still have that 15% cushion available with you. You may be having more. There you are correct that when you have two people for one job, there's a complacency. One says, okay, if I'm not there, the other one will do it. The other one will also say the same thing, and at one time you will see two people for one job and nobody is available. And this, I used to work in steel mill before joining PIA. So in steel mill, there was a generator operator. Steel mill has got their own electricity generation. They have got gas turbines. And they were those days, I am talking of 1977. So those days there was lots of electricity, but that was like a standby arrangement. Steel mill used to have one person for those generators, as a standby in case electricity fails, because if there are furnaces on and there's no electricity, then the whole system can go haywire. One day I saw the engineering chief, Russian. He was furious. I said, what happened? He said, look, they have appointed another operator. Another job of the operator is just to push a button, but he has to be there available. Anytime when the electricity fails, he has to, switch on the generator. So I said, you should be happy you have two people now instead of one. He said, no. Everyone will think that the other is there and nobody will be there when there is electricity failure. This is what happens. Complacency. So otherwise, as far as the payroll is concerned, it's only 15 to 16%. So PA is not paying that much to their people.
थैंक यू सर, शुक्रिया.